Hey all, here are OS Reviews. In this video, we're taking a closer look at the Onyx Boox Palma 2. This has been described as a pocket-sized Kindle because it has much more petite dimensions thanks to the 2:1 aspect ratio screen similar to on a smartphone, compared to most typical e-readers having a more conventional 16:9, more of a boxy or square-shaped screen. That's going to be wider and as a result not as easy to slide into most pockets. And so this could be an interesting companion device for folks that love reading, whether it's articles, books, comics, even emails, because it is technically running on a full version of Android. It's going to be more powerful and less locked down compared to the Kindle OS, perhaps helping you be more productive compared to doom scrolling on social media or playing back games with a regular color, OLED, or LCD screen. As you can tell here next to something like a Google Pixel phone, the size here really is equivalent to that of a modern-day smartphone. Of course, all the benefits of a e-ink screen remain true here, and that is it's very easy on the eyes. In fact, you don't even have to activate the front light. If you are reading at the beach or outdoors when there's a lot of light hitting on the screen, it behaves just like a piece of paper and becomes very easy to see. There's no flickering, reducing eye strain, and if you are in a darker environment, such as using it in bed at night, you can still activate the aforementioned front light to make it a little easier to see. The lighting here is pretty consistent and can also be adjusted in terms of color temperature from warmer to colder depending on your preferences. So this paper-like display is great for visibility. Here it is next to a regular AMOLED screen which is at 50% brightness, and you can tell how it just washes out significantly more under similar conditions, plus it will drain more power if you're cranking the brightness all the way up, as well as be a little bit more harmful on the eyes. Along with the fact that an e-ink screen can actually sit persistently on a single static image like this without draining any power until the pixels have to rearrange themselves. So you can theoretically get longer battery life out of this compared to a always-on LCD or OLED screen. So these are all attributes that have made e-ink screens so popular for readers. Now, if you've been following our content for a while, you guys may have seen that a few months back we did review the original Boox Palma 1. And so the second generation model, at least from afar, doesn't seem that radically different. The design is mostly copied and pasted. You can still find two colors in terms of the frame. There's this pretty clean white version that we have, as well as a more stealthy black color that you can pick between. And across the two gens, we still have a 6.1-inch 300 ppi black and white e-ink screen. So Boox have yet to implement a color e-ink version using something like Kaleido 3, which is an option that competitor Bigme with their Hybrid series have introduced. You could pick between a black and white version or a color e-ink version. Granted, the general consensus seems to be that the black and white e-ink panels are still going to have a little bit better contrast when it comes to reading. The black pixels against the white background just seems a little bit more clean, compared to color e-ink having a more murky contrast. So the premise here is still very similar to the last generation model. There's really only three notable upgrades. The first one is on the edge, we now have a fingerprint scanner integrated with the power key. It adds another layer for unlocking the device a little bit more securely, and generally works well enough. Just rest your finger on it for a split second and the device will unlock. Again, missing on the original gen. The second point of upgrade will be the processor underneath. The second generation model is now rocking a Qualcomm Snapdragon 750G octa-core processor compared to the original model's Snapdragon 662. And on paper, 750G is the better processor. On benchmark scores including N2 you can expect close to 400,000 compared to on the 662 scoring closer to 240,000, so almost 60% faster all-round performance. And perhaps more notably, the GPU of the new processor is almost 2 times more powerful, at least on paper. So the original was around 36,000 and the newer model is close to 96,000. But as some early adopters have pointed out, interestingly enough, the difference doesn't feel quite as significant as it does on a regular Android smartphone or tablet with a LCD or OLED screen. And that is because perhaps one of the bigger bottlenecks here is with the refresh rate of the e-ink screen still being the same as before. And that is close to 30 frames per second on the extremely fast refresh rate. So it's still going to feel a little bit more choppy, as you can tell here, compared to a regular display. Even though it's already faster compared to most entry-level Kindle devices, for example, if you're doing a bit of scrolling, it still works fine, but don't expect it to be buttery smooth. And as a result, the increase in CPU and GPU performance might not be quite as obvious to the eye. However, having more power underneath the hood is always good for future-proofing, But one aspect that's perhaps a bigger deal is the new processor is built on a 8nm fabrication process compared to the original's 11nm architecture, and the smaller the chipset transistor size should theoretically mean better power efficiency, and that is something that I was actually able to discern a little bit more. So operating both devices, which have an identical 4000 mAh capacity battery inside, the Palma 2 often provided an additional 1 to 2 hours of usage before the battery ran out, while retaining cooler thermal performance as well. For example, when charging back up, the device remains cooler compared to on the Palma 1 that heats up a little bit more on the top corner. And that is compared to, by the way, the Big Me Hybrid original model had an even more outdated 12nm processor using a MediaTek P35, which is an older chip scoring closer to 147,000 on AnTuTu10 benchmarks. In other words, out of the trio of devices, the Palma 2 here is definitely the most powerful underneath the hood, although the RAM for multitasking remains the same at 6GB as before. It's also backed by 128GB of built-in storage that can be thankfully expanded via a microSD card slot located on the left-hand edge. Now, one aspect that hasn't changed, however, compared to the Palma 1 is it is a Wi-Fi and Bluetooth-only device. There is no cellular modem built on in, aka you can't pop in a SIM card and actually use this as a phone for making calls. And that's why I'm calling it like a pocket Kindle as opposed to a e-ink smartphone, which technically the Big Me Hybrid is. It supports cellular capabilities. Admittedly, I think this is a curious decision, because if I was Boox, I probably would have created two versions of this device. One which has the cellular modem for folks that want to use it as a minimalist style phone, kind of like a light phone alternative, maybe calling it the Pro Edition, as well as having one which might be a little bit more stripped back, including the camera here in the rear, might not be absolutely necessary on a device like this. So I do think it was a bit of a missed opportunity. They could have addressed two concerns that people had on the Palma 1, which is A, some folks thinking it was a little bit expensive at around $280, so if they removed some of the sensors, including the camera here on the rear, they could have maybe lowered the price a little bit more for folks wanting a more essential version of the device, more cost-effective. And then B, folks that want to use it as a phone could have picked up a Pro Edition instead, but as it is, they're still going with the same strategy as on the Palma 1, and it's more of a minor spec bump more than anything. So fingers crossed we'll see more configuration tiers next time around. Now the back still houses a kind of coarse paper-like texture, which makes it pretty easy to grip, and I think it's a clever touch that also again symbolizes the fact this device is really built for reading. And otherwise we still have a volume rocker on the side that can serve double duty as page turn controls when you are reading to flip a page if you don't want to use the touchscreen. There's also a remappable hotkey here on the left that can be used to manually refresh the page, clearing it of any ghosting, artifacting, as well as assign other applications to launch whenever you're clicking on it using the software. Bottom here features just the Type-C port for charging. There's still just a mono speaker as well as microphone here. Speaker quality still isn't the greatest, and there isn't a standard headphone jack on this model either, which might be one other slight missed opportunity, because in some ways a device like this gives off a more retro feeling. So having another option if you're trying to listen to audiobooks, for example, instead of using Bluetooth would have been nice to see, but it is what it is. The cover, by the way, is still non-user removable, and it's otherwise crafted with a polycarbonate plastic frame, but has a decent density to it. You don't necessarily need a case because it isn't built out of glass, for example. Now there is also a haptic vibration motor that I will say feels a little bit more robust and well calibrated compared to the Gen 1 Palma. So as you're navigating around the Android 13 UI, that has also been upgraded, kind of the third point, compared to Android 11 that the original Palma was running on, you can feel the clicks and tactile bumps of the haptic vibration here being just a little bit more better tuned in my opinion. Now inside of the packaging, aside from the Palma 2, you can also expect just some quick extras like a USB Type-C to Type-A cable for data transfer and charging, as well as a quick start guide, plus a pin here for accessing that micro SD card tray. And otherwise, the resolution of the screen remains the same as before, again 300 ppi, and the camera on the rear is still the same 16 megapixels with autofocus and LED flash, designed primarily for document scanning, and it still touts a water repellent design. So it can't be fully submerged, but if it gets a little bit wet from rain or if you're splashing it, it should still survive. Now taking a closer look here at the UI, it's pretty simple and easy to operate. The icons are similar looking compared to the Palma one. Maybe there's some slight aesthetic differences compared to Android 11 versus Android 13. We can see some minor differences in how the icons and fonts are being displayed. As well as on the Palma 2, there's now an AI assistant built on in, which was technically missing on the original model. Granted, it seems to be largely based on just ChatGPT, and because both have access to the Google Play Store, there's nothing stopping you from just downloading the regular ChatGPT app, Gemini app, or any other app that you frequently use from the store yourself. And so I honestly wouldn't say that the addition of a built-in AI app here is anything revolutionary, but you're able to ask questions and it is built on in. Just like before, the launcher from Boox doesn't have a universal app tray, so it will just scatter applications as you install them on unlimited home pages, kind of similar to iOS. And you can, of course, download other launchers to change that experience if you want even more customization, but this is the default view that it comes in. Perhaps one other difference in the software is going to be the addition of a now dedicated camera app. Compared to on the original Palma, you actually only could access the camera using the document scanning tool. You couldn't actually use it to record video or take other images with a first-party app, which is now present on the Palma 2. So we're able to just do a little bit more similar to on a regular phone camera, including toggle on and off HDR mode, as well as even access a pro mode for adjusting aspects like ISO, white balance, and again recording video in addition to capturing still images. Now even though the screen is in black and white monochrome, the sensor for the camera is still full color. So if you are viewing back those images on a computer, for example, later on, it will still be color images. Now we can also swipe up from the bottom corner on the device to bring up our multitasking tray. 6 GB of RAM still seems to be mostly sufficient for keeping the device running pretty smoothly, all things considered. Furthermore, swiping on the middle section here allows you to go back home, as well as swiping on the right edge instead pulls up an e-ink command center, where you can change the saturation as well as the refresh rate, prioritizing the sharpness of the screen versus a faster refresh mode if you're watching videos or browsing the web, scrolling up and down. There might be a little bit more ghosting occurring, but you can expect it to not be quite as janky or refresh every time that the pixels rearrange. So this main method of navigation remains the same as before. And last but not least, to the left of the home page, you'll also find a universal search bar, plus a shortcut into your last opened books. This Neo Reader app still supports all of the major file formats, including EPUBs, PDFs, Word documents, text, so on and so forth, remaining a relatively smooth and enjoyable reading experience, with again the 300 ppi res of this e-ink screen remaining quite sharp, even for smaller text. You can also access features including pinch to zoom to make the font size larger versus smaller, as well as again leverage the volume rockers to instead go back and forth between different pages, adding bookmarks as well as long holding on single words to pull up additional context info such as the dictionary definition, pronunciation guide, Wikipedia entry, as well as add in your own annotations and notes. And there's also a translation tab, choosing between Onyx, Bing, or Google translation engines. And last but not least, there's also now an AI tab here. Pop up a floating window instance of the app that we mentioned earlier. It will copy the text in for you to quickly search up using OpenAI or ChatGPT by default. So at least you get a little bit deeper integration than it being only within that app. You can also transfer content between documents and books that you're reading into the AI for asking more specific questions and prompting. Looks like in future updates, you'll be able to switch between DeepSeek and a few other models as well and kind of experiment, consolidating them all within the single app. There's also a floating tab here on the edge that you can pull up, allowing us to trigger auto page turn control, so after a few seconds, it will turn by itself without requiring a click. You can also change things like font style, punctuation, spacing, margin size, contrast can all be adjusted as well. That being said, just like on the original Palma and similar to the Big Me Highbreak, it seems like on these more compact e-readers, we still don't have support for a pressure-sensitive active stylus pen. So for example, if you have a Wacom stylus from a larger e-note or e-reader device, it's not going to be recognized unless you're using just a generic capacitive stylus instead. And that might be another nice-to-have feature, perhaps in a Pro model down the line, akin to that of a Samsung Galaxy Note smartphone. Now here's also a look at a inversion mode or a night mode if you want to flip the contrast between the black and the white. Here's also a quick look at web browsing and using the ultra-fast refresh rate mode. So again, the screen won't blink to erase the previous pixels. There might be a little bit more ghosting, but as a result, you can still swipe up and down web pages in a slightly more fluid way. So in similar fashion, if you're trying to check out a couple of webtoons or comics, this is what it would look like. Still, again, is remaining quite sharp with pinch to zoom support as well if you want to get in a little bit closer. And also just as reference, this is what a video playing on YouTube looks like. So it's not going to be as enjoyable as a color LCD or OLED screen, of course, and again, 30 FPS is kind of the fastest that e-ink screens are capable of refreshing on these mobile devices at this point in time. But with the faster refresh rate mode activated, you can at least do a little bit of content consumption if you are really in a pinch. This is what the sound is like on the Boox speaker. How competitive it is in the smartphone space, since they really do produce beautiful hardware and also a very elegant software package. So it is a single speaker unit, but it's actually not as thin sounding as I expected. But again, in a Pro model, having stereo speakers or a headphone jack could be even more appreciated. A few other basics, including the antenna reception quality for Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, both seem to be quite strong. I was getting almost full bars in both instances. No disconnection issues to speak of, thankfully, largely due to the plastic chassis here. And otherwise, when it comes to battery life, expanding on that a little bit more, this is going to be dependent on factors like if you are refreshing the screen really often, as well as having Wi-Fi turned on 24/7. If so, expect the battery life to be similar to on a smartphone. That is, if you're constantly scrolling up and down through web pages, it might last closer to a day or two. But if you're only using it in their first-party reading app, downloading books offline, then it'll be closer to a Kindle, lasting you a couple of weeks, in fact, before you have to recharge it again on standby and only for light reading. Also keep in mind, if you have the front light turned off and you're primarily reading this when there's ambient sunlight around you, that also will drain less power as well. Speaking of, the camera here does also have an LED flash of its own, can act as a torch or flashlight. It'll look something like this. A couple of other standard Android shortcuts, by the way, include screencasting onto an external display, screen recording, as well as screen capture can all be found on here as well. Now, aside from the regular Google Play Store, you'll also find the Onyx Store as well, which is essentially their version of a very simplified bookstore. This app hasn't really changed compared to on the Palma 1, which is to say it's essentially giving you the free classic books that you're able to download and check out, the original Sherlock Holmes, so mainly titles that have passed on to the public domain as their copyright date have passed. You won't necessarily find more modern novels, for example, inside Boox's app store, but all of these titles are free. And aside from the titles that you're able to find from here, you can always drag and drop files over to the device or even check out the Boox Drop app, which is a wireless file sharing app, as long as your device, including laptop or phone, and also the e-reader are on the same Wi-Fi network, you're able to transfer the files back and forth wirelessly as well. Or again, you can sign in with your Google account and just check out your Google Drive instead as well. Now, by the way, the Neo Reader app that we saw there from earlier actually opens up a separate instance for each document that you're opening. So you can actually jump back and forth between multiple open documents at the same time, which is pretty neat. For instance, over here we were looking at Alice in Wonderland, whereas we had a second book over here also open, and as you can tell, it remembers the place that we were in automatically, and you can still jump back and forth between those concurrent open documents. Again, the hardware is capable of running pretty much any app that you would download on the Play Store, similar to on a smartphone or tablet. So you can easily download the Kindle app, Dropbox, other services that you might commonly want to use, as well as even try out, I guess, some social media apps as well. For instance, WhatsApp, Twitter, or X, Facebook can all technically be downloaded as well if you're trying to read back messages. For instance, on this e-ink screen, that might be a little bit better for your eyes as well, and texting wasn't too problematic. Here's a final look at CPU-Z, again some of those specs that we can confirm, indeed running on the Snapdragon 750G, also has a built-in accelerometer and an ambient light sensor up top as well, so they can detect your surrounding environment. If you want to have it on the auto mode, the front light can activate automatically if it gets dark enough, or you can use just the manual slider yourself. Now, just like the Palma 1 though, it still doesn't have a front-facing camera. Again, not that an e-reader really needs one, but I guess, again, if they ever made a Pro version and added cellular capability, and you wanted to use it for video conferencing in a pinch, I guess that could be one application. Some basic utility tools built in by Boox include a voice recorder or kind of a memo recorder here. It's quite simple though, and there isn't any voice-to-text transcription built in. Again, that might be a little bit of a missed opportunity because some folks might want to use this as a kind of business or productivity tool. You would have to download your own third-party app to leverage transcription. You can also find a simple calculator here that looks actually quite nice on this very minimalistic e-ink screen. A very basic clock, alarm, stopwatch tool that have also been redesigned by Boox. And finally, checking out the more advanced settings, you're able to remap that smart button to trigger other features, including double-clicking to access the AI assistant versus opening up other applications. Can all be set and customized on here as well. So it's pretty versatile, as well as a long press can trigger one other command. So you have 3 shortcuts in total. A couple of other display settings include the full refresh frequency can be changed. So how many page turns or taps before the entire page will blink to clear off any ghosting, for example, as well as a desktop screensaver can also be set up, kind of acting as an always-on display mode of sorts with a very simplified view. You can choose between a couple of other images, for example, bring over a clock, either in a digital or analog view, and also choose after how many minutes should the info be refreshed and consume a little bit of power. There's also a larger clock or calendar view that you can pick between as well. So for example, if we choose this instead, and now we turn off the screen, it will look something like this on your desk. Again, only refreshing the digits of the clock after X minutes, so it still consumes very little power on this always-on mode. Pretty cool as a display piece when it's not being used. I'll also mention that one characteristic of the screen that hasn't changed compared to the original Palma is technically there is a bit of a gap between the top layer, the digitizer and glass, versus the e-ink panel underneath. In other words, it isn't a fully laminated screen, but that's largely because of the front light, since e-ink screens aren't using backlights. There needs to be a little bit of space for the LCDs to be placed in between the display stack. I wouldn't say it bothers me that much, but it is something to briefly flag based on some comments I saw from the original video that particular manufacturing process remains true here as well, but it's pretty commonplace on these e-ink devices. So there we have it. That's been a closer look at the Boox Palma 2 by Onyx. Again, this is a device designed for folks that do a ton of reading and want something that can fit in their pockets and they can take anywhere with you, being able to install additional reading and productivity apps. I would say one question that lingers would be, is it worth upgrading compared to the original Palma 1? And honestly, my response would be, if you have the original Gen 1, this is probably not enough of a reason to upgrade just yet because the design, the overall feeling is very similar. It's not a radical upgrade at this point in time. However, if you don't currently have a pocket-sized e-reader like the Palma 1, then the Palma 2 definitely again improves on some subtle ways, including a faster CPU, GPU underneath the hood for future proofing, as well as better power efficiency and thermal efficiency, while still remaining a joy to use when it comes to reading because of this beautiful e-ink panel. So even though a device like this is still going to be niche and probably never won't be mainstream, I'm still glad to see manufacturers like Onyx continue to experiment with devices like these because it offers something a little bit different, adding just a touch of fun and excitement. That being said, if you're looking to save a few bucks and pick up the Palma 1, it can still be a good opportunity as well as choice to consider. I believe it's currently selling for around $30 to $40 less compared to this Palma 2. So it's really up to personal choice whether you think it's worth spending a little bit more to get that fingerprint scanner, slightly upgraded internals, and software experience or not. Which, speaking of the latter, I do think it is a little bit of a shame. When it comes to OS level upgrades, it's really rare to see longer term support from many of these e-ink manufacturers. For instance, the original Palma 1 will probably never receive an OS upgrade to Android 13 like the Palma 2 here, even though the hardware should still be capable of running that. So that is still an area pushing for longer-term software supports and updates that would be nice to see down the line, especially if they bring out a more Pro Edition device in the future with higher costs. I think it should be more of an expectation to have longer-term software support as well. But again, firmware updates will still be pushed occasionally to these devices to improve on the stability, things like security patches, but OS upgrades are a bit more rare. The second point that I'll mention is, again, the size and form factor of this device, around 6.1 inches, is similar to a modern-day Android smartphone, which, yes, is pocketable, but perhaps not quite as mini-size or ultra-compact sized as devices that we've seen in the past. So I just bring this up because there is one other alternative available from Xiaomi, which is known as the Ink Palm 5 Mini, and this thing has a even more compact 5-inch form factor instead. So it would be closer in size to something like the Sony XZ2 Compact that also is a 5-inch form factor. So if you want something that is going to be even more travel friendly, that might be something to consider. Plus the Ink Palm 5 is even more cost effective, selling for around $100 to $150. So that might be a great option if you don't want to spend quite as much and just dip your toes into a more mini-size ebook reader. That being said, the internals in terms of RAM, I believe, is around 2 gigabytes to 3 gigs compared to 6 gigabytes on this model. So with the Palma, you are getting more performant internals, but just another option to throw into the mix. So you can check out more details if interested in the links down below, but for now that's been our video. Thanks for watching here at OS Reviews. That's been the Boox Palma 2.